Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. You ever have one of those moments that sneaks up on you, so quietly that you don't realize how much it'll change you until much later? That's what happened to me one autumn afternoon, in the quiet corner of my cousin Martha's house, when her boy, Evan, looked into my eyes and told me something that would shift the way I saw my whole family, and maybe even myself. It was a Sunday, early November. The air had that crisp edge to it, like it had been polished by the wind. Martha's house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by trees that were halfway bare, their branches scratching lightly against the windows. Inside, everything smelled of roasted chicken, cinnamon, and the faint trace of furniture polish. Martha was proud of her home, and she kept it spotless. I'd come over to help her with a small family dinner. My daughter couldn't make it. My husband was away for work, so it was just me, Martha, her husband Tom, and their son Evan. He was 24 then, recently back from grad school, the kind of young man who still carried boyish energy in his step, but spoke with an old soul's steadiness. I'd known him since he was a baby, of course, but that day felt different. Maybe it was because I hadn't seen him in a while, or maybe because time has a funny way of changing people right under your nose. Martha was fussing in the kitchen, her voice echoing through the hallway about how the gravy was too thin. I was setting the table when Evan came in from outside, his jacket dusted with fallen leaves. He had that look, distant but thoughtful, as if he'd been walking through his own thoughts and hadn't quite come back yet. "Need any help?" he asked, setting his phone on the counter. His voice had deepened since the last time I'd heard it, calm and grounded. "Sure," I said, handing him a stack of plates. "You can start by setting those." We worked side by side for a while, the clink of dishes filling the silence. It was comfortable, almost meditative. Every so often, I'd catch him glancing toward the window, eyes tracing the slow fall of leaves outside. Something about that moment felt suspended, like the whole house was breathing softly, waiting for someone to speak first. He finally did. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked suddenly, still staring out the window. The question caught me off guard. I laughed softly, thinking he was joking. "What do you mean?" He turned to me then, and I'll never forget the way his eyes looked. Clear, honest, a little tired, but burning with something real. "I mean," he said, "doing what everyone expects you to do, saying what you're supposed to say. But deep down, it's not really you." The clatter of pots in the kitchen reminded us that Martha was still nearby, but in that small space between us, the world seemed to shrink. I saw something in him, an echo of what I used to feel at his age, that pull between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. "I used to feel like that," I told him quietly, arranging the silverware. "Sometimes I still do." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I knew you'd understand," he said. "Mom and Dad, they try, but I can't really talk to them about it." The conversation drifted gently from there. We talked about small things, work, family, the strange way time seems to run faster the older you get. But underneath the words was something else, something deeper. Mutual understanding, maybe. Recognition. When dinner was finally served, everyone gathered around the table. Martha's laughter filled the room, Tom's jokes rolled easily, and Evan sat across from me, quiet but attentive. Every now and then, I'd catch his eyes on me again, steady, thoughtful, and I'd wonder what else he wasn't saying. After dessert, when the dishes were done and the house began to settle into its evening hush, Evan walked me to my car. The air outside was cold enough to bite at my cheeks. The sky was dimming into that deep indigo that only November can pull off. He leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said softly, I told you the truth earlier." I looked at him, puzzled. "About what?" "About not living my own life," he said. "But I didn't tell you why. I think I've been afraid of disappointing people." His voice cracked slightly, not from emotion exactly, but from honesty. And something in me responded, not as an aunt, not even as family, but as another human being who'd once stood on that same uncertain edge. I didn't have any perfect advice to give him. Instead, I just said, "The people who love you will find a way to understand. Eventually." He nodded slowly, his breath clouding in the air. "I hope so." And then, for a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the road. I thought of how rare it was to be seen that way, to have someone look right into you and recognize something true. That was the night Even told me the truth. And though I didn't know it then, it was only the beginning of a much deeper understanding between us, one that would test what I believed about family, about honesty, and about how sometimes the smallest moments can change everything. A few weeks passed after that Sunday dinner. I went back to my usual routines: work, errands, phone calls with my daughter, the endless cycle of ordinary days. But somehow that quiet conversation with Evan stayed with me. It played in the back of my mind whenever I drove home from work or folded laundry at night, maybe because I'd seen something in him that reminded me too much of myself, of who I used to be before life became a list of responsibilities. One Thursday afternoon, Martha called. She sounded tired, her voice stretching thin over the phone line. "Would you mind stopping by this weekend?" she asked. "Tom's been working extra shifts, and Evan's been, well, he's been distant again. I think he listens to you more than he does to me." I agreed. There was concern in her voice, but also a mother's helplessness, the kind that comes when your child's heart starts to carry weight you can't lift for them. When I arrived that Saturday, the weather had turned gray and moody. The kind of day where the sky looks heavy with unched rain. The house was quieter than usual. Martha had gone out for groceries, leaving Evan in charge of fixing a leaky faucet. I found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, tools scattered across the counter, brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up when I stepped in. "You again," he said with a half smile. "Guess Mom sent backup." "She did," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "though I'm not sure how much help I'll be with plumbing." He laughed, a low, warm sound that eased the air between us. "It's fine. I'm almost done." For a while, I just watched him work. The rhythmic twist of the wrench, the soft drip of water, the quiet hum of the house, it all felt strangely comforting. There was something grounding about being in that space with him, without the noise of family chatter or the usual expectations. When he finished, he wiped his hands on a towel and nodded toward the back porch. "Want some tea? I made a pot earlier." We stepped outside, mugs in hand. The porch overlooked the yard, now carpeted with wet leaves. The air smelled like rain and earth. It reminded me of childhood, of muddy shoes, wooden swings, and the innocence of not knowing how complicated growing up would be. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea. Then Even spoke. "You ever feel like the people you love see you as a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore?" I looked at him carefully. "Sometimes," I said, "and sometimes we help them see who we really are. It just takes time." He nodded slowly, turning his mug between his hands. "Mom still treats me like I'm 16. I know she means well, but it makes it hard to talk to her about what I actually want." "What do you want?" I asked. He hesitated. His eyes met mine, clear and searching. "I want to live a life that feels honest, even if it doesn't look the way everyone expects." There was a quiet certainty in his voice, and I realized he wasn't asking for permission. He was declaring something. A beginning, maybe. I felt a small swell of pride, not the kind that comes from being older or wiser, but from witnessing someone step into their truth. "You'll figure it out," I said softly. "You already are." He smiled then, the kind of smile that carried both relief and gratitude. "You always make things sound simple." I laughed. "That's because I've already made all the hard mistakes." We stayed out there until the first drops of rain began to fall, gentle and cold against the wooden steps. The kind of rain that feels like it's washing away the noise of the world. As I drove home later that evening, windshield wipers brushing rhythmically, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting there, so earnest, so sure, yet still searching. It reminded me that life isn't about getting everything right the first time. It's about having the courage to face your own reflection and tell yourself the truth. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, just a few lines. Sometimes the right words come from the unlikeliest voices, and sometimes those voices remind us who we used to be. I didn't know it yet, but that weekend would mark the start of something even more revealing, something that would test not just Evan's courage, but mine too. A couple of months passed after that rainy Saturday. The holidays rolled in quietly, wrapped in the smell of pine candles and the soft glow of string lights. I wasn't planning on staying long at Martha's Christmas gathering that year, just a short visit, a few smiles, and then back home. But as with most things in life, it didn't turn out quite that simple. Martha's house was full that night, neighbors dropping by, laughter spilling from the kitchen, the faint hum of old Christmas songs playing through a speaker that occasionally skipped. The tree in the corner glittered with golden ornaments, and the air carried the sweet weight of cinnamon cider. It felt familiar, warm, until I saw Ivan standing by the window, apart from the noise, lost in his thoughts again. I made my way over, careful not to draw attention. "You hiding from the crowd?" I asked. He turned, smiling slightly. "Just taking a break. Too much small talk for one night." "I get that," I said. "There's only so many times you can answer 'how's work' before your brain starts to melt." He laughed quietly, and the ease between us returned, the kind that doesn't need filling with constant words. We stood there together, watching snow begin to drift past the glass in lazy spirals. Outside, the world was still and silver, the kind of night that makes you feel like everything's been wrapped in cotton. Evan's voice broke the silence. "Remember what I told you a while back? About not living my own life?" I nodded. "I remember." "Well," he said, exhaling slowly, "I finally did something about it. I quit my job last week." I blinked. "You did what?" He laughed nervously. "Yeah, I've been miserable there for months. Long hours, no meaning, no spark. I finally realized I was working for approval, not purpose." There was pride in his voice, but also fear, the kind that comes when you take a step forward without seeing the next one yet. "That's brave," I said, meaning it. "Hard too, but brave." He looked relieved, like he'd been waiting for someone to say those words out loud. "Mom wasn't happy," he admitted. "She thinks I'm throwing away everything I worked for." "Martha loves you," I said softly. "She just doesn't want you to fall." "I know," he said, "but sometimes you have to fall to find your footing." The way he said it, steady, calm, made me realize how much he'd grown since that autumn day. His uncertainty had turned into conviction, and I could see, in that moment, the man he was becoming. Later, after most of the guests had left, Martha busied herself in the kitchen while I helped gather empty cups and plates. Ivan appeared beside me, quietly taking a stack from my hands. "You don't have to do that," I said. He shrugged. "I know, but you shouldn't have to either." We worked in companionable silence, moving through the room as if guided by the same rhythm. When everything was done, he motioned toward the porch. "You've got a minute?" The night had deepened outside, the snow thicker now, soft flakes drifting under the porch light. The world felt muffled, almost sacred. "I've been meaning to thank you," he said. "You're the only person who really listened. You didn't try to fix me. You just heard me." I looked at him, surprised by the emotion in his tone. "Sometimes that's all any of us need," I said. "Someone to see us." He smiled then, but his eyes shone with something more. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. "You know," he said quietly, "you've helped me more than you realize." For a long moment, we just stood there. Snow fell soundlessly around us, catching the porch light like silver dust. I could hear faint laughter from inside, the clink of dishes, Martha humming an old tune. The scene felt timeless, like a memory forming right before my eyes. "Even," I said finally, "you don't owe me thanks. You found your truth on your own." "Maybe," he said, his breath fogging in the cold, "but you gave me the courage to say it out loud." Those words stayed with me long after that night, because what he didn't know was that he'd done the same for me. Hearing him talk about honesty, purpose, and fear, it stirred something in me that I hadn't touched in years. Driving home through the quiet snow, I thought about all the truths we keep buried under obligation, under what we think others expect. Sometimes it takes someone younger, braver, to hold up a mirror and remind us that it's never too late to live with honesty. That Christmas marked a turning point for both of us. For him, it was the start of becoming his own person. For me, it was the realization that wisdom doesn't always flow from the older to the younger. It moves both ways, like light passing between two windows on a winter night. And though neither of us said it then, we both knew that conversation wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of understanding and a quiet promise that the truth, once spoken, can't be unseen. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, leaving behind damp earth and the smell of new beginnings. I hadn't seen Even or Martha much since Christmas. Life had, as it tends to, carried me along. Work deadlines, doctor appointments, and the quiet rhythm of my empty house. But one evening, just as the sun was dipping low, I got a message from Even. It simply read, "Can we talk?" The next afternoon, I met him at a small cafe on the edge of town. The kind of place with chipped mugs, a radio that hummed softly from another era, and the comforting smell of roasted coffee beans. Evan was already there, sitting by the window, sunlight touching his face. He looked different, lighter somehow. When I sat down, he grinned. "I got into the fellowship." It took me a second. "The one you told me about? The photography program?" He nodded, his eyes bright. "Yeah, I start in June. I'll be traveling for a few months, working on a project about family and truth, what it means to really see people for who they are." I smiled, my chest warming with pride. "That sounds incredible, Evan. You did it?" He shrugged modestly. "Couldn't have done it without your encouragement." I shook my head. "You found the courage yourself. I just reminded you it was already there." We sat there for a while, sipping coffee, letting the conversation wander like it used to, soft, easy, full of pauses that didn't need to be filled. But beneath it, there was something new. A sense of closure, maybe, or transformation. He wasn't the same young man I'd spoken to months ago, unsure and restless. He'd found his footing, and watching that unfold felt like watching the sun rise after a long, uncertain night. At one point, he pulled a small photograph from his bag and slid it across the table. It was a candid shot, me at Martha's house, standing by the window last Christmas, light falling across my face. I laughed softly. "When did you take this?" He smiled. "That night you told me I'd figure it out. I wanted to remember that moment. You looked steady, like you believed it." I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. There was something humbling about being seen that way, not for how I appeared, but for what I meant in someone's story. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "I guess I wanted you to know that you were part of what inspired me." This project, it's not just about families, it's about the people who help us find our truth. You were that for me. For a moment, the noise of the cafe faded, the clinking cups, the low murmur of voices. It was just us, sitting across from each other, two people from different generations, somehow meeting in the middle of what it means to grow, to understand, to care. When we finally stepped outside, the air was soft with the promise of spring. The trees along Main Street were just beginning to bud, their branches still fragile but reaching upward all the same. We stood by my car, sunlight spilling across the pavement. "You'll send photos from your trip?" I asked. "Every week," he said with a grin. "You'll probably get sick of them." "Not a chance," I told him. He hesitated then, his tone turning thoughtful. "You know, when I first told you the truth, that day at Mom's, I was scared, not just of what you'd say, but of being seen too clearly. But now I realize telling the truth doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself." I nodded, letting his words settle. "You're right. The truth is never as heavy once it's spoken." He smiled, then pulled me into a quick, warm hug. It wasn't dramatic, just genuine. "Take care of yourself," he said, "and thank you for everything." As I watched him walk away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet peace, the kind that comes when you realize a story has reached its natural ending. He was stepping into his life, and somehow he reminded me to step back into mine. On the drive home, the radio played an old song I hadn't heard in decades, and I found myself smiling. The road stretched out before me, open and glowing in the late afternoon light. I thought about how connections don't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through shared words, honest eyes, or a conversation that lingers long after it ends. When I got home, I placed the photograph he'd given me on my mantel, not as a token of the past, but as a reminder that truth, once spoken, can ripple through our lives in ways we never expect. That day, I realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes it isn't about changing the world. It's about helping one person see their place in it. And in doing that, we end up finding our own. So, if you're listening tonight and there's a truth you've been holding back, maybe this is your sign. Say it, share it, because sometimes the truth, spoken from the heart, is what finally sets both people free. Don't forget to give us like and subscribe this channel.